Welcome, friends of Powerhouse Bakery and all my favorite divas and dudes out there. Welcome to my kitchen. I'm Suzanne Parker and I'm the founder of Powerhouse Bakery, and what we love to do in this little kitchen is show the world that healthy can taste amazing. We like to meet every customer and client where they are in their health and wellness journey. And we've been here for about 7 years, really trying to show that just because a food is gluten-free doesn't have to mean that it's free of nutrition. In fact, quite the opposite. What we really love to show people is that when you take out a nutrient-rich grain like wheat because of perhaps an allergy, we really owe it to ourselves and of course the customer to replace all those missing nutrients. And so whenever we are trying to make and remake recipes going from good to great, we always want to think about where is the nutrition. And today what I want to show you is building your plate. We are still in the topic of protein, which is always of great interest to our customers, and especially when you're fighting disease or you're just trying to prevent disease. What we really want to do is make sure that our plate is well balanced and fully loaded with nutrition. And what better spot to focus on than the protein that we get from our foods. And so what I want to show you today is how to build that plate. And remember that we always want to talk about how to build your best foods list, because whenever you have your favorite foods, they will start to be your routine, and whenever we can do that, we know we're going to have something that's sustainable, not just a diet, but a healthy lifestyle. So what I've got right here is just a little prelude to what I'm going to do in our Building Your Best Foods list. I've got some amazing purple rice, which I love. It's got great color and texture. It's really one of those things that you think of rice as being kind of an old and boring, but not when you're looking at this beautiful stuff. And when I look at the nutrition facts panel, I'm really excited that it has 6 grams of protein in a quarter cup, which equates to about a half a cup when it's all cooked, which is about the same as a can of pinto beans. A half a cup of pinto beans is the same amount of protein as these beautiful purple colored rices. So in general, whenever we're looking at whole grain aromatic rices, we know that we're going to be getting more protein than a white rice. Here's another couple of interesting items. These are some garden wraps, 7 sprouted whole grains. I love this. It's giving us all kinds of front of pack information, and we can pretty much assume when there's whole grains and sprouted, we can hope and assume, of course, that there is going to be more protein in it. When we look over at the label, look at that. We are right. It has 6 grams of protein in one wrap. If you know your labels and your nutrition facts, you would know that a typical enriched white flour tortilla might have 2 grams in a serving, or 1 tortilla. So kind of fun. Here we are with some beautiful organic yellow corn tortillas. How much protein do you think these might have? 1 gram, so not a lot. If we were to compare this to a typical corn tortilla, it would be about the same. So when we're looking at yellow corn, we know that while it's not a high protein source, sometimes it's not always about the total grams of protein, but it's all about the company that the food keeps. We're going to show you about that. So take a look at some of the meals that I have at Powerhouse Bakery. What I want to show you as we go through these different meals is how we build your plate so that we can get the best nutrition out of every bite. Here I've got our eggs and greens frittata. It's going to be made with whole eggs and some egg whites. And you pegged it. The reason why I do that is to up the protein by adding a little extra egg whites in that ratio of the fats. Also, it's going to be loaded with greens. So it's got kale, spinach, it's got a little bit of zucchini, and of course the tomatoes on the top. Served with a small amount of roasted sweet potato and red potato. Next to it, I've got a vegan dish. So you're seeing tofu here, sauteed with a little bit of peppers and of course those potatoes and lots of herbs. And then on this side, it's a little more of a traditional meal. This is going to have our 4.5 ounces of lean pork tenderloin with some wild rice and mushrooms. So I didn't use the purple rice here. I used a jasmine rice because I really want you to know that we don't always have to use the super exotics. We can certainly use the white or the lighter colored rices, especially when we pair it with protein, because balance matters. And we also want to make sure that we make foods that you and your family love. So getting a wide variety of color, texture, and flavor is super important. If you haven't seen our meals before, they come in these little containers, and it really helps teach us another factor, which is one of those healthy rules to live by that I love to teach my clients and patients here at Powerhouse Bakery. Portion is king. So when I put together this little meal, what I want to help the customer see is that portion matters. We've got lean turkey, or you could use lean beef, seasoned with all kinds of red, bright spices, and of course our complex carbohydrates that also just happen to be very high in protein. So if you had to guess how much protein you were getting in this plate, as well as the corn tortilla that we could add to it, what do you think it would be? Well, I'm going to tell you. It is 42 grams of protein, which is very concentrated protein. And surprisingly, sometimes folks will see our meals and go, oh, that's not enough food. I'm going to be hungry. Certainly, I'm going to need to eat more than this. And I love to surprise people that when you put it out on a plate, it actually is plenty. Not to mention, if you heard my last video and we were teaching you about how much protein do you need in a day, the US RDA actually says you need about 50 grams for the whole day. So we got more than we need in this one meal. So it's really helpful to understand portion and the ratio that we're talking about when we see grams of protein and what it looks like in a tray. So really valuable, I hope, for you to have a visual of what does protein look like when it's in a dish. Because ultimately, what we want to do is really help you build your best foods list. And we always go back to this because your best foods are going to be so important to the success of your wellness plan. Your best foods, for sure, should be something that you enjoy. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to just stick with your old family favorites. What we can do is take those foods that you enjoy and bring those wonderful foods to the next level. And what I mean by that is taking good foods and making them great. And we do that by the company that the food keeps. So not only do we look at portions, but we also look at what are we adding to the food to bump up the nutritional quality. Yes, protein's important, but also so are the vitamins and the minerals and the energy that we talked about in our last videos. So foods that you enjoy. They should be familiar, they should be culturally relevant. They also should be easy to prepare. Whenever we think of that, so often, especially when I worked at HEB, I had to really convince customers that healthy did not have to be hard to prepare. And that's something that we often think of is when we're trying to go from good to great or making a favorite food healthy, it's going to take a lot more work, it's going to be more expensive, and we're afraid people aren't going to like it. So that's exactly what we want to convince you is not the case. You can take your favorite foods, make them healthier, and really focus on the ones that are easiest to prepare. There's all kinds of new ways that we can cook now. We're experimenting with air fryer. That's kind of a cool way to cook without a lot of added fat. Great approach. Another one that we've got is the pressure cooker. All this really does is cook a food faster because it adds pressure to the whole process. So under pressure, foods can get to a higher heat and cook faster. Great option for going from good to great and using foods that you love and making them easy to prepare. But don't feel like you have to use a new fancy cooking method. We have the crock pot, which is an old favorite. I still love to use that. In fact, truth be told, I am not very good at pressure cooking and the air fryer. And that's because I've gotten really good at the old favorites, which is a long, low and slow if you have a tough meat item or lots of root vegetables that you want to cook. I also love to use a pan fry. Nothing wrong with a pan fry. You can still do batch cooking in a pan fry scenario. And so I really want you to think through what some of your favorite foods are and making sure that they're easy to prepare. The other thing that we want our favorite foods to be is not only for us to enjoy them, but we also want them to be easy to pack. So what I mean by that is on your trips out and about, you want food to be easily stored and ready to go. Something that maybe the past generations didn't worry about. If there was more at-home style preparation and only maybe one of the family unit working outside the home. Now it's so different. So we really want to have things that are easy to pack, store in the refrigerator, maybe even the freezer. So understanding how we can make your favorite foods easy to pack is going to be important. So the trick in all of this food prep is you want to cook your food right when you purchase it. So keeping that cold chain intact. What I mean by that is when you purchase something, you want to quickly chill it down so that you can cook it the next day, or you want to cook it right when you get home and taking it to temperature and then letting it cool quickly. So the least amount of time you have it in what we call the danger zone is really important. The danger zone is between 40 and of course 140 degrees. So if it's easy to pack, we want to cook that food right out of the refrigerator. We want to heat all the way to the cooking level, which could easily be up to the 150 range. And as soon as it's cold enough, then you can put on the airtight container. And that's going to be a great way to put it in the refrigerator and even in your freezer. So you can recycle little containers like this. H-E-B's got some fabulous ones that are made with glass. And so think about when you're doing your best foods list and you're understanding where you're going to get your best nutrition, think about how you're going to store it. You want to cook it quickly. You don't want it to stay out on the counter more than 20 minutes or so, because anytime it's in that danger zone of warm foods, 40 all the way to 140, is what we call the highest growth of bacteria. So that's where we don't want foods to stay for very long. So less than or equal to 20 minutes. Make sure that it gets fully chilled, and then you can put on an airtight container and it will last easily for 7 days. And of course you can freeze your items for at least 30 days in the freezer. Okay, so our best foods lists are going to absolutely mean easy to prepare and foods that you love. The next thing we want to look about is balancing our macros. So when we're looking at protein, we have learned through these visits that we get protein from animal products as well as plant. So balance macros. And what do I mean by macros? Well, we're talking about proteins, of course, but we also have our carbohydrate category and our fats category. And what's really cool is because we're in a protein category, we easily can cover carbohydrates because we know that we have plant-based foods that are rich in protein. And here's the other part. Whenever we're looking at an animal-based food, it's always going to have fat mixed with it. Anytime you have an animal food, it's going to have some degree of fat. That's just the way God made the animal, is to have some fat working into the muscle for support of energy as well as rejuvenation of tissue. So when we're looking at balancing our macros with protein as the center of our focus, it's pretty easy to do. So whenever we think of protein foods, we know that we've got animal sources and we have plant sources. Animal sources are pretty easy. We know that it's meats of all varieties, including fish, and of course eggs and dairy. We have a couple of good categories too that we look at. You probably remember me talking about the essential amino acids. Some are going to be required in the diet in order for our bodies to make all the 20 amino acids that we need. So we have 20 total, and we have about 8 that are essential. Those amino acids easily come complete when we're looking at a food that comes from an animal. So anytime we have an animal product, we know that it's going to have all of the essential amino acids in just about the right ratio that our body needs in order to rebuild muscle and rebuild our immune system, as well as our tendons and ligaments and all the enzyme systems that make our metabolism function optimally. So the good news is it's pretty easy to get all the amino acids we need in an animal food. What's the caveat? The more animal food we eat also increases the fat content. We can't help it because that's just the way God made those animals. So when we're thinking about eating even lean beef, it's still going to have a fairly high amount of fat that's included. Whenever we start looking then at plant-based proteins, what do you think automatically goes up? just like those beans and rice. If we look at that label, not only are we getting 6 grams of protein, but we're getting 30 grams of carbohydrates. And remember, we talked about carbohydrates being absolutely important, even for that high-functioning athlete. And they have been erroneously taught that carbohydrates are excess and that it's going to turn to fat if you eat too many. And what I tried to really clear the air on is that carbohydrates are the stuff of energy. What we don't want is to have too many carbohydrates flood our system all at once, overflowing our need for energy, so how much muscle we have on board, and then those extra calories go to fat storage, which is what we don't want. So needless to say, when we have a plant-based protein, we are going to get more carbohydrates. Now, they are complex carbohydrates, and remember we talked about that term. Complex carbohydrates mean just like this rice, it comes with a good amount of other stuff, versus a simple carbohydrate like watermelon or honey doesn't come with much. Doesn't come with much fiber, maybe a little bit of minerals and vitamins, like for honey and for watermelon. We know we can get some vitamin C, but we really don't get adequate other macronutrients. So when we're trying to balance our plate and we're trying to understand where protein fits, complex carbohydrates that come from plant sources of protein and of course animal protein is a really easy one. So when we're starting to build our plate, we make sure that we get our protein covered. Now, if you remember from our last visit, we know that our protein needs, according to the health experts, is somewhere between 50 grams and maybe we're pushing it by even saying 70 grams. Because the USDA says probably 10% of our calories should come from protein. We could maybe go a little bit higher and say even as much as 20. But remember that a lot of diets now are touting even more. The zone diet, which is considered something of kind of a middle of ground or balancing your macros, says 30% protein. And then remember I mentioned that some other diets that take out the majority of our calories from carbohydrates say that protein should go up as much as half of our calorie intake from protein. And so these are not balanced. These are not balancing the macros in the way that I think most health experts would say are healthiest. Now, there are some cases where this will help an individual. So again, just like here at Powerhouse Bakery, our goal is to meet people where they are. And in some cases, really reducing their sugars can help in some disease states. And so there are a few cases where really increasing protein can be valuable, short term most likely. And also remember that the human body is so adaptable. So you can certainly find people that do really well, at least for a while, on these higher protein diets. And so our body is able to adapt using those branched chain amino acids that come from animal proteins and using those amino acids that are branched chain in nature for energy. So it's not to say that we can't function in a higher protein environment. What we always want to do is understand what does our bodies need to function best. And so understanding what characteristics you're trying to address in your symptoms are always really important. So if you know you typically don't get enough protein, then focusing on getting greater protein sources is going to be valuable. So let's keep going. If we look at building our plate, and we want to understand where we can get protein to at least get that minimum. Say we're going to shoot for 50 grams. So building your plate. I put together a couple of scenarios, and so I want to share them with you. If we hold the calorie level constant of typical food combinations, we've got beans and rice. We'll say about a 1.5 cup serving. If we look at quinoa and chicken, and we add 2 ounces of chicken and maybe a 1/2 cup of quinoa. Another example, if we have kale and bean salad with maybe a slice of cornbread, brown rice pasta with a cashew cream sauce, or eggs and greens frittata, like the one I showed you in our little plate here. These are all examples that I want you to see how we start adding up the nutrient value of a plate. So if we look first, holding the calories constant, the beans and rice about a 1.5 cup serving, gives us a little over 400 calories, 16 grams of protein, 42 grams of carbs, about 2 grams of fat, and overall about 8 grams of fiber. Pretty interesting, right? So when we look at that serving, we know that it's still going to fit about in this container, because I try to use them all based on our meal plans so that you can get a good visual of how much it is. So if you know that it's more difficult for your body to digest animal protein, this is going to be a great way for you to get about a third of your day's supply in one meal. Pretty awesome. The next one over, same calories. I'm giving you a 1/2 cup of quinoa. And if you remember when we looked at our complex carbohydrates, quinoa is an excellent one. It also happens to be a perfect protein because of the makeup of those essential amino acids, meaning that if we eat quinoa, we've got all of the amino acids we need. Now, if we consider the amount of carbohydrates in that dish, we're getting 12 grams, and we're still getting a little bit of fat. Now, of course, if we wanted to add flavor to these dishes, that could be a little bit of extra fat on top. So really, just to make it clear, what I'm looking at here is just the base macronutrients of these dishes. And so 6 grams of fiber is also really nice because that quinoa is providing us that complex carbohydrate that not only gives our body plenty of protein to add to our daily total, it's also giving us some fiber. So as we look at the chicken component, we know that chicken does not give us any carbohydrate and it does not give us any fiber. So in this example, we're getting 6 grams of fiber, whereas in the beans and rice, we're getting more fiber. And that's, of course, because of the beans and rice. Let's look at the next one. Kale and bean salad. Those are powerhouse foods for sure. Adding a little cornbread on the side. And I gave you the details of a 1/2 cup of beans, a 1/2 cup of kale, and some cornbread. So what's really cool is this vegan dish that is giving us about the same amount of calories as the one with the chicken, about the same protein, a little bit more carbs, of course, there because we're getting all those wonderful beans, 6 grams of fat, again with that cornbread, and look at all the fiber because we're getting that wonderful bean component. So when we need to get more fiber, we definitely want to pick protein sources that come from plants. Definitely healthier on the gut. So often when we think of athletes and they're eating diet that's very high in animal protein, they have a very hard time on their gut. Why? Because it takes a lot longer for animal protein to process and to exit the body. And so if we're trying to keep our gut healthy, we want to pick protein that comes more from plants. And so quinoa and dark brown rices and of course kale, all great sources. Now let's look at the next one. Brown rice pasta with a cashew cream sauce. Doesn't that sound amazing? And we actually do make this one. It's called our vegan mac and cheese. We use a cassava pasta as well as the brown rice pasta, and they're both lovely. Notice though how much fat we have to get in order to get our protein level up for this particular meal. Because we're using nuts as a protein source, it takes a lot more nuts to get that equal amount of protein that we can with the complex carbohydrates or of course the chicken. And what's important to realize is that while nuts do give us a great protein, they are typically incomplete, which means they have to be paired with other foods that are going to balance out those amino acids. And also they're very high in fat. So if you need to have extra fat, you're trying to gain extra calories, or you know that you're not getting enough fat from other sources, or if you're trying to cut out all oils from your diet and only use whole fats, which I absolutely believe this is a good idea, using nuts is perfect. You are getting fiber from the nuts, and you're of course getting the fat and the protein all together in that one food, which I think is really valuable. Now, keeping this in mind too, when we do our protein comparing, we don't have to have 2 complementary amino acid groups in the same dish. It just has to be throughout the day. So if you're getting those protein grams covered with your nuts, doesn't mean that you have to get the counterbalance in that same meal. So as long as you have some brown rice somewhere in the day, it's going to come out just fine. Lastly, our eggs and greens frittata. This one is going back to the animal protein, which is lovely for getting all of your protein requirements. All the amino acids are complete when you add dairy and eggs. So what's nice in this dish is we're getting plenty of protein. The carbohydrates go way down. The fats are moderate. We could do even fewer fat grams if we decided to use fewer egg yolks and more egg whites. And of course, we're getting a good amount of fiber from the greens. So in general, when we're looking at creating your plate and really including great sources of protein, we want to get a wide variety of foods. We want to make sure that throughout the day, you include some of your protein coming from complex carbohydrates. We want to make sure that you do get your protein from some complete amino acid sources. So that could be dairy, that could be eggs, and of course that could be any animal protein. Remember that whenever we're dealing with dairy and eggs and animal muscle, we are definitely going to have some fat that goes along with that. It's not a bad thing, but that is definitely a component that we want to think about when we're adding up all of our calories. And lastly, as often as you can, don't forget your veggies, because even veggies like kale and broccoli definitely have some protein in there as well. And a little bit adds up and goes a long way. So make sure that you get a wide variety of colors on your plate. And most of all, keep building your best foods list so that you love every bite and every bite is full of nutrition. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.